That would not say tourist.
I think I guess I'll get. All right. Let's see. Testing, testing. Can everybody hear me pretty good?
Yeah.
All right. So, who is ready to drink Irish beer today? Sorry, you gotta wait about an hour for me to speak first. Then the real fun part commences. So real quick, I'll do some disclosures and then I'll go in about myself, and then we'll go through a bunch of history about beer, especially since it's St. Patty's weekend, Irish beer. So first disclosure, I have a bachelor's degree in business management, not a bachelor's degree in PowerPoint. So if you see any grammatical errors or it's not that great, I'm sorry. I'm not that good with PowerPoint, even though I'm very well educated. Same for if Joyce Staples was here, who's on the board as well. I'm not that good with grammar. So if anything I say confuses you, please feel free to raise your hand in the middle of the presentation, and I can answer questions or clarify anything or go through that. And if it's in the middle of a thought, I might say, wait until I finish the slide. Other than that, welcome. Let's see. Hold on. I think Hunter changed faster and then my screen went out on me. Okay. So welcome to Irish Beer History with myself, who is Jake Abell, owner of Scuffle Brewing Company. I have a bachelor's degree from Liberty University in business management. I'm also a certified brewer through Virginia Tech and University of Richmond. So I am the head brewer at Scuffle Hill and also one of the owners. And then I also served in the Marine Corps prior to that as military police and did some presidential security and all that fun stuff. But, sir?
In order to run a brewery, do you need to be certified?
No, actually. You don't have to be certified. The certification is just some fancy thing I can put under my name that says I'm a certified brewer. Anybody can really be a brewer, but what they told me in that course is if you go to start a brewery afterwards and you're bad at brewing beer, you're probably going to go bankrupt. And if you go, if you go to brew for somebody else, like say Anheuser-Busch, New Belgium, yada yada, if you're bad at brewing beer there, they're going to probably fire you. That's what they told us in the course. There's no homework, but if you don't learn anything, you're probably not going to have a career long. Yeah, so it's pretty cool how that works, but let's see. Okay, so now we can get into the PowerPoint. So what is beer and what is it made of? So beer is an alcoholic drink produced by the brewing and fermentation of starches from cereal grains, mostly commonly malted barley, although wheat, maize, rice, and oats are also used. The fermentation of the starch sugars in the wort is what beer is called before you ferment it out. Wort produces ethanol and carbonation. Well, let's rephrase that. Yeast produced ethanol and carbonation through the process of fermentation. Most beer is brewed with hops, which add bitterness and act as a preservative and stabilizing agent. Other flavoring agents, such as groot, herbs, or fruits, may also be used. In commercial brewing, natural carbonation is often replaced with forced carbonation. All that means is, before we had fancy technology, natural carbonation was you put the beer in a bottle, you had a little yeast in it. Over time, the CO2 buildup of the yeast, give me 1 second, sir. The CO2 buildup of the yeast would carbonate that bottle from the fermentation process and create the bubbles. Now we just hook it up to a regulator, push CO2 on top of it, and it gets it carbonated for us. Now onto your question.
What is groot?
So we were going to get to that later into the patent.
Withdraw the question.
But I can get to it now. So groot is what beer was called that's not brewed with hops. So a long time ago in beer history, pretty much we didn't know what hops were back in the 1300s, 1400s. So we kind of use anything we scavenged, because humans were hunter-gatherers, right? So sticks, juniper berries, all that kind of good stuff, anything that would be a bittering unit. Yeah, the juniper Juniper branches, yeah, sticks. Kind of very nasty how we made beer back in the day, but that's what it comes from. And then, of course, beer's four main ingredients now in modern day, of course, is barley, yeast, water, and hops. They all have a major factor in how beer is produced. So, in order to kind of go over history, we first have to understand the brewing process. Beer brewing is an intricate process with multiple steps. I would say it's probably one of the harder alcohols to produce, unlike wine and mead and distilling. This actually has an intricate process, as you can see. So first you have your milling step, which means you have all your malted barleys. You have to crush them down and get the husk broken up, so that way when you go into the mashing portion, you're basically making oatmeal out of barley, is the simplistic way to put it. You're steeping grains at a certain temperature between 148 and 160 degrees Fahrenheit. You're extracting sugar out of those grains into that water, and then you're going to transfer it over into a lautering phase, which is where you transfer that wort, which is now the sugar water you made from steeping those grains, into your boiled kettle. And lautering is the process of rinsing that grain with hotter water to make sure you get all the sugar out of it, and to get a high enough content in the boil kettle to meet your batch requirements for beer. So the boil step is where you're going to add your hops into your beer. So you're going to add whatever hop you're using in the brew to add bitterness unit. It also boils down and concentrates the sugar for fermentation process, and it pasteurizes the wort per se too. So it makes it clean for you to drink. The whirlpool step is a step that helps clarify the beer. So we add agents like Whirlfloc or Irish moss in there now. It kind of drops out any grain dust or anything that would be floating around in there, or any hot particulate or anything left. Helps clear the beer, because when you do the circular motion, it helps it all fall out. That's science. I don't quite understand how it works, but it does its job. It makes our beer clear without filtration. Of course, the cooling step that you see down there is, once you take it from boiling, you've got to take it down to 70 degrees, because you can't pitch yeast at really hot temperatures. So you've got to get the wort cooled down to at least 70, 72 degrees Fahrenheit, sometimes 68, sometimes in the 60s, and if you're doing a lager, into the 50 degree Fahrenheit range, in order before you pitch that yeast for fermentation, which gradually we go into fermentation there. That's when you put yeast on top of the beer that you already produced out of that process, and then you seal it up and you let them wait. That's the maturing process. The yeast will create alcohol and do their job and help make it an alcoholic beverage. And that's when they produce that ethanol and CO2. And then of course at the end, before you package, if you're a big brewery, you have filtration, which will filter the beer even more to clear it up, and then packaging, obviously keg, bottle, can, however they distribute the beer at that point is where it goes from. Now we're going to go on to Ireland. So Ireland, despite being a relatively small island nation, has been a brewing powerhouse for centuries. Ireland's contributions to the worldwide beer culture have been immense, and in many parts of the world, the idea of the Irish pub, whether genuine or boxed, remains surprisingly evocative. Ireland's beer history, just as its overall history has always been, is intricately intertwined with that of England. From the 12th century colonization of Ireland by the English to the 1801 Act of Union, the famines and the independence movements in the 19th century, and the Anglo-Irish Treaty of 1921, England has had a large influence over many aspects of Irish life, including its beer. Sorry to break everybody's dreams, but the English kind of helped them with beer. Kind of, but we'll get into that. That is one thing, yeah. If you go to anywhere in the European Union, it's going to be about served 50 degrees Fahrenheit, which is why the maltier beer tastes better. But as for his question earlier, earliest form of Irish beer. The earliest form of beor, which is Gaelic for beer, in Ireland is believed to have been brewed in the Bronze Age. The discovery of a possible brewery site at Follet Feha, I'm not an Irish speaker, so it was a grass-covered mound by archaeologists Devin Moore and Billy Quinn and Cardico called Galloway, led to the test brewing of a Groot, a beer flavored with plants and herbs but not hops, in 2001. So they found this old recipe of how they used to make beer with those plants and those sticks and those twigs I was talking about. Ingredients were barley, bog myrtle, meadowsweet, water, and yeast, resulting in a beer said to be drinkable and worthy of our ancestors' efforts. Now, I haven't tried that beer, but I would hope that they liked it back then, because I don't know how it tastes now. English influence on Irish beer culture. So Ireland, like its Celtic cousin Scotland, has a greater connection to spirits than beer, sharing usage, I think it's how you say it, usage breed, which is Irish whiskey, but also having uniquely poteen, an Irish form of moonshine that is usually made from barley and sometimes from potatoes. The distilling of poteen was outlawed in 1661 and not legalized again until 1989. Kind of sounds like the US with moonshine. The encouragement by the English Parliament to push beer consumption in the 1730s and thus avoid the immoderate use of spirituous liquors is best exemplified in Hogarth's 1750 prints entitled Gin Lane, met with limited success in Ireland. So what was that book, Gin Lane? It was pretty much glorifying beer and how beer was good for you to drink, and pretty much saying gin is bad for you to drink and that you get too drunk on gin. And that's basically the gist of the book. They didn't care too much for people drinking spirits back in the day. They liked you to drink beer or wine. Like Scotland, Ireland grows no hops, and its beer had to be flavored with imported, mainly Flemish hops, which were the cheapest available at the time. A 1733 ban on such imports, however, forced Irish brewers to purchase more expensive hops from Hereford and Worcester, England, and sometimes beers were simply brewed without hops altogether or with indigenous herbs as in ancient times. See right there as we go in, the English meddled again in Ireland beer. Irish beer production. Records for the 18th century show Irish beer production to be markedly consistent. In 1720 to 1724, the Irish paid duty on a total of 822,000 hectoliters. In 1770 to 1774, 762,000 hectoliters. And in 1790 and 1794, 818,000 hectoliters, with 172,000 imported. The increase in imports was partly the result of the American War of Independence, which closed these colonial markets off to English breweries. There were also several barley shortages, including two very poor harvests in 1740 and 1741, which triggered the first of the Irish famines. By the 19th century, the brewing capacity in Ireland had increased and the Industrial Revolution had taken hold in England. As a result, beer remained within English shores for home consumption. In 1808 to 1809, for instance, Irish beer production was 1.277 million hectoliters and imports were only 3,680 hectoliters. Duty and English protectionist policies, which both changed widely during the 19th century, also had significant effect on Irish beer production in terms of the sourcing of raw materials and how they were used. So what is duty? Duty is a fancy word for tax back then. So English taxation. In addition to the beer tax, England had also been charging a malt tax since 1697, using the money to finance several wars. To ensure that brewers did not avoid paying the malt tax, they were forbidden to use unmalted grist in 1816. An almost German-sounding law was introduced, which stipulated that only malted barleys and hops could be used in the brewing of beer. The malt tax was repealed in 1880, but as is often the case in brewing, the effects of tax continued to reverberate through Irish brewing for decades afterwards. So what is that German law that they're talking about there? That was Reinheitsgebot. So Reinheitsgebot is pretty much a German purity law that they say this is what you can put in beer, and that's it, nothing else. So how in America we like to put fruits and everything like that in our beer, in Germany that's quite a sin in beer brewing. Let's see, origins of the dry Irish stout. The porter beer style originated in London in the early 18th century, but quickly became hugely popular in Ireland as well. It was first brewed in Ireland in 1776, initially just with brown malt. Irish porters were later made from a mixture of pale and brown malts, mostly to reduce production costs. The porter flavor changed again after 1817 with the invention of black patent malt. Now porter could be made cheaper, yet with just 5% of this new, strongly flavored, almost burnt tasting dark malt plus 95% pale malt. Eventually this porter morphed into a lean dub, which is a dry Irish stout. And by the start of the 20th century, it had become the principal beer of Ireland, whereas in England, pale ales and the variants had already replaced porters in the hearts of the local beer drinkers. So before there were breweries, legend has it that Ireland's patron saint, St. Patrick, even had his own brewer, a priest named Meskin. An Irish monastery has dominated the manufacture and supply of ale for centuries, which is why there is the ruin of an abbey within the grounds of the Smithwick Brewery in Kilkenny, Sydney. Monks, of course, were expert herbalists, so ale was flavored using herbs, particularly gentian, as hops were difficult to grow. Rather delightfully, the monks would drink their beer during Lenten fasting and gave it the name liquid bread. As many people didn't know, back in the day, we actually drank more beer than water in America and kind of all over the world. Why? Because the beer was actually cleaner than the water back then due to the alcohol production. Irish beer appears to have always been reddish in color, and by the 17th century, it was being produced in small local cottage breweries by women who were known as alewives and drunken alehouses, a room set aside in a private house for drinking ale. Now we're going to the rise of Guinness, the beer that everybody knows Ireland is known for. Come the 18th century and beer making, gotta fix my tongue. Come the 18th century and beer making was becoming commercialized. In 1756, Arthur Guinness, the son of Richard Guinness, who had brewed beer for the rector of Calebridge, bought a small brewery at Leixlip in County Kildare. Just 3 years later, Arthur took a 9,000-year lease on a disused brewery at St. James's Gate, where the waters from the Wicklow Mountain via the rivers of Dodder and Pottle were particularly celebrated for brewing. Arthur got the water for his brewing for free and was later outraged when forced to pay 10 euros per year for his supply. Guinness also began to make porter, and by 1799 had decided to stop making ale in favor of porter, a dark, almost black beer characterized by a highly roasted flavor, thanks to kilning malt and raw barleys to a state resembling burnt toast. So we're going to keep on with Guinness. Guinness was only one of very many Irish breweries. Some suggest there were 100 or more local breweries throughout the country, but one little detail is emblematic of what would become of Irish brewing. Arthur Guinness bought his first brewery using a bequest of 100 euros. When he died in 1803, Mr. Guinness was worth 10,000 euros. That's either euros or pounds. The colossus that Guinness was already becoming would mean it would dominate Irish brewing and leave few competitors. A century after Arthur's death, and there were fewer than 30 breweries in Ireland. Whilst Guinness had become the biggest brewery in Europe, less than 20 years later, it was the biggest brewery in the world. It was around this time that Ireland's great gift of the world of brewing, the style of beer known as Irish dry stout, was developed. To avoid taxes, brewers began using unmalted barley to save on duty, as malted barley was taxed. The roasted barley gave the beer that dry and bitter taste, which remains the hallmark of Irish stout to this day. The dryness arouses the appetite, meaning the stout is uniquely satisfying without being saturating. The first glass almost calls for the second. Guinness prosperity and economic hardships. The Guinness brewery prospered, overtaking Baines and Crawford, who had been for a long time the biggest brewery in the UK. Dublin brewers began to use the canal system to transport their beers out of the city to the country, strengthening their position and allowing them to buy up smaller breweries. Sounds kind of like Anheuser-Busch in American history. Economic stagnation following the independence meant other small breweries folded and famous names were lost. Murphy's of Clonmel, Egan's of Tullamore, and in Dublin itself, only 2 breweries remained by the outbreak of World War II, Guinness and Mountjoy Brewery. So Ireland's craft beer movement. Until the Irish craft beer movement began in the mid-1990s, the history of Irish brewing was one of economic consolidation. Guinness and other global brewers bought up and bought out the remaining Irish brewers, and the diversity of ownership and the diversity of styles of Irish beer declined. But diversity never dies, and in the 1980s, the kindling of Irish craft beers began when the Hildren Brewery in Lisburn in Northern Ireland opened. In 1981, and when 2 cousins, Liam and Leiphart and Oliver Hughes, began to unsuccessful attempts at craft beer brewing, opening Hardy's in Blessington in County Wicklow and Dempsey's of Inchinore in Dublin City. They may not have succeeded as independent businesses just then, but they succeeded in a truly significant way by firing a new kiln for Irish craft brewers. So most popular Irish breweries at this moment in today's age is Guinness, Rascals, Urban, Galway Bay, Wicklow Wolf, the Five Lamps, Franciscan Whale, Wicklow, Mezkin, Hilden, the Porterhouse, Killarney, and many more. As you can see, Irish craft beer is thriving today from that movement. So wait, where did the Irish Red come in? We just talked about Guinness and how they made a dry Irish stout, but why was there an Irish Red Ale? Irish brewers applied their innovations to produce their take on bitter, a style that was lighter, refreshing, and wildly popular in England during the latter part of the 19th century. Though the Irish stout was a household name, the Irish still sought their own full-flavored yet light and drinkable beer. So instead of using the more expensive caramel malts typically used in bitter, they used their roasted barley to achieve the color and flavor they were looking for. It all resulted in a reddish-hued beer with a pleasant toasted malt flavor and a quenchly dry finish. Again, why do we use that roasted barley? To avoid taxes from England. So not just Americans hated taxes from England. So why is all Irish beer dark or malty? This is due to the water profile. Ireland's water profile is very alkaline, making it great for brewing dark or malty beers. Alkalinity in the water buffs the pH, keeping it from becoming acidic when roasted malts are used in beer. Plus, we learned their roasted malts were cheaper to use than English malts, so they leaned on them heavily. So now we're going to go into the tasting notes of beer, and then we're going to get into the really fun part. So, Irish Red tasting notes. So we're going to go through some aroma. These guidelines are all by the BJCP program, which is Beer Judge Certification Program. I'm a preliminary judge in that. So if you've ever been to a brewery and seen won a bronze or a gold medal in this competition for this style, I'm one of the people that's qualified to judge that style based on these guidelines and palate tasting. We'll kind of go through how to taste beer and everything like that once we get downstairs. But aroma, so an Irish Red, the aroma should be low to moderate malt aroma, generally caramel-like but occasionally toasty, toffee-like in nature. May have a light buttery character, although this is not required. Hop aroma is low to none, usually not present. It's quite clean. Appearance, amber to reddish copper color. Most examples have a deep reddish hue, clear, off-white to tan-colored head. The flavor, moderate caramel malt flavor and sweetness, occasionally with a buttered toast to toffee-like quality. Finishes with a light taste of roasted grain, which leads to a characteristic dryness to the finish. Generally no flavor hops, although some examples may have a light English hop flavor. Medium-low hop bitterness, although light use of roasted grains may increase the perception of bitterness to the medium range. Medium to medium dry finish, clean and smooth. Lager versions can be very smooth. And it says no esters. Esters is like the fruity flavors in beer that come from the yeast. So you won't taste many dark fruity flavors like plum or raisin or anything inside of an Irish Red. And then we got more. So the mouthfeel, medium to medium body, although examples containing low levels of diacetyl may have a slightly slick mouthfeel. Moderate carbonation, smooth, moderately attenuated, may have a slight alcohol warmth in stronger versions. Overall impression, an easy drinking pint, malt focused with an initial sweetness and roasted dryness and finish. Comment, sometimes brewed as a lager. When served too cold, the roasted character and bitterness may seem more elevated, which is why, I think somebody stated earlier, beer served in 50 degrees in England. They like the malt forwardness, they don't like the hot bite. And then ingredients may contain some adjuncts, corn, rice, or sugar, although excessive adjunct use will harm the character of beer. Generally has a bit of roasted barley to provide reddish color and dry finish. Unlike the English and Irish, in America we love using corn, rice, and sugar in our beers. Light lagers and all of that is basically rice and corn for us. But when we do a class on that history, we'll go through why we source those as our beer partake. And then now we'll get into the dry Irish stout. So the aroma, coffee-like roasted barley and roasted malt aromas are prominent, may have slight chocolate, cacao, and other grainy secondary notes. Esters medium low to none, no diacetyl, hop aroma low to none. So diacetyl that you keep hearing is like a butterscotch, buttered popcorn tasting beer. It comes from yeast production, particularly yeast stress. In English beers, you want a tiny, tiny bit of that in their English styles of beer or Irish, but you don't really want it in beer per se in any other style. So the appearance is jet black to deep brown with garnet highlights and color, can be opaque, if not, should be clear. A thick, creamy, long-lasting tan to brown colored head is characteristic. Flavor, moderate roasted grainy sharpness, optionally with light to moderate acidic sourness, and medium to high hop bitterness. Dry coffee-like finish from roasted grains may have a bittersweet or unsweetened chocolate character in the palate, lasting into the finish. Balancing factors may include some creaminess, medium to low to no fruitiness, and medium to no hop flavor. Again, no diacetyl. So mouthfeel, medium light to medium full body with a creamy character, low to moderate carbonation. For the high hop bitterness and significant portion of dark grains present, this beer is remarkably smooth. The perception of body can be affected by the overall gravity, with smaller beers being lighter in body, may have a light astringency from the roasted grains, although harshness is undesirable. Overall impression, a very dark, roasty, bitter, creamy ale. So when we talk about mouthfeel is kind of how heavy that beer feels when you drink it. So obviously if it's thick, kind of like you want to chew on it like some of those darker beers, that's your heavier mouthfeel you're feeling. And that comes from more residual sugar left over from beer fermentation versus a light lager in America. It's very light, very crisp, goes down easy because almost all the sugars are fermented out of that beer. So then comments on dry Irish stout. Comments, this is a drought version of what is otherwise known as Irish stout or Irish dry stout. Bottle versions are typically brewed from a significantly higher OG and may be designated as foreign extra stouts if sufficiently strong. While most commercial versions rely primarily on roasted barley as the dark grain, others use chocolate malt, black malt, or a combination of the three. The level of bitterness is somewhat variable as the roasted barley character and the dryness of the finish allow for interpretation by brewers. And then again, when we go into the ingredients, pale malt, roasted barley, chocolate, black malt. But back in the day, roasted barley, just pale malt. So, let's see. The beers we'll be tasting downstairs will be Sullivan's Maltings Irish Red Ale, Smithwick's Irish Red Ale, Lost World's Shingla Irish Red, Great Lakes Conway's Irish Red Ale, O'Hara's Irish Stout, which will be on Nitro Guinness Drought, Left Hand Dry Irish Stout on Nitro, and Wiseman's Gathered Friends Dry Irish Stout. So some people may ask me, hey Jake, why aren't we tasting Guinness Drought, Guinness Foreign Stout, and Guinness Extra Foreign Stout? So the difference between Drought Foreign Stout and Extra Foreign Stout is alcohol content. Because back in the day, when you were shipping a foreign stout or extra foreign stout, you added more hops and more grain so that when it shipped overseas, it tasted like a Guinness Drought. The flavors declined because you wanted more alcohol and more hops to preserve that beer when it shipped across the seas. Other than that, that is the end of my presentation. If anybody has any questions, please feel free to ask. Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Calories, is there a difference in calories with the various types of beers?
So, yes, in general speaking, yes. Generally, your darker beers are going to have more calories due to residual sweetness left over from the fermentation process. So, just like with mouthfeel, a lot of darker beers, you have some sugar content left over because if it was completely eaten out by the yeast, it would just be a very dryish, black, almost sour black coffee taste, very astringent, and you wouldn't really want to drink it. So a lot of times either brewers stop fermentation early to keep sweetness in the beer, or the yeast eats so much that then too much alcohol inside that beer kills it off and leaves residual sweetness. Now your Irish Red would probably be moderate in calories. It is an amber colored beer, so it's going to have a little bit of residual sweetness to it just due to the malts used in it and the English styles of yeast. Whereas like your lower calorie beers in America, like your light lagers and things like that, they're about 90, 99 calories just due to the fermentation, eating out all the sugar and just leaving you with alcohol. Anyone else? Yes, ma'am.
Is Guinness exclusively brewed in Ireland, or do they have breweries in other places?
So originally Guinness was just brewed in Ireland at their Dublin facility. Now they have multiple facilities, one of them being in America, actually in Baltimore, and they do brew Guinness there. The reason why they chose Baltimore is because their water profile matches the water profile closest to Ireland. So it helps them, produce the same product and also have a hub here in America, so that way they ain't having to ship beer internationally across seas. The product stays fresher on our shores, so it's better for business. But also there's ways to adjust water profiles in the U.S. so they can add salts back to their waters to make the minerals in the water be what it needs to be to match Ireland's profile too. So that's how they've been able to expand while keeping the same product. Anyone else? Yes, sir.
And when you were talking about the German laws about
Mhm.
making beer,
Mhm.
Does that mean that, like sometimes you look at Heineken or something like that, it's bottled in the United States. Does that mean it's manufactured here? I mean, it's brewed here, or is it just bottled here?
So, yeah, if it's bottled in the U.S., it's probably manufactured in the U.S. A lot of German brewers like Heineken have facilities here. Again, same thing as Ireland. They choose a location that has the closest water profile, and then they alter it if need be. Now, for the German purity laws back in the day, that pretty much means like only German malts should be used, only German hops should be used. No corn, no oatmeal, no rice, no fruit. I'm sure Jonathan is thinking of times when we'll do a German beer class, and I'll really get into that Rehegetzbuch, which is the law, but they were pretty strict on this is what a Hefeweizen should be, and this is what you should have in it, and it is a sin in German culture if you put anything else in this beer other than that. But the bottled in the U.S., they have to say that per law for federal TTB guidelines too.
Thank you.
Anyone else? No? All right, let's go drink some beer then.
Yeah.